Hello everyone, Ember Power here and welcome back to a new video. In this one we're going to be taking a look at the best new cards from Crown Zenith. So the important thing to know about Crown Zenith off the bat is that there's not really a whole lot worth translating and going over. So Justin Basil has very kindly gone over some of the best cards that are worth translating. I've also picked out a couple at the top here that we'll go over that are just kind of like niche, I guess, in their one price functionality. So there is some cool cards, but there's obviously like being a special set, there's just not masses of particularly great cards, so we'll have to bear that in mind as we go through this reveal. But first off, we've got the Rotom V Star with the attack Scrap Pulse, 250 HP, and then for 2 Lightning Energy, does 80 damage, and you put any number of Pokemon tool cards from your discard pile in the Lost Zone, and this attack does 40 more damage for each card you put in the Lost Zone in this way. So this is directly just a plus 40 damage buff, I believe, from the Rotom V that we got way back in Lost Origin. So the attack itself is okay, I believe. This attacker was doing pretty decent in Japan. I believe it got like top 8 or something. So I do think there is some potential here in Rotom V Star. But the HP is a massive worry for me. Like 250 is just like absolute garbage. We do have to bear in mind that we are getting stuff like Miraidon in Scarlet and Violet, as well as the Generator card that will allow you to accelerate energy from the top of your deck, so charging up Rotoms should be pretty easy. But then the ability Conversion Star says during your turn you may use this ability, discard any number of cards from your hand, then draw that many cards. So I'm pretty sure there's a supporter, I can't remember which one it is, that does this exact same effect. It's not a great ability, I guess, but in a deck like this, where you're trying to just discard a bunch of tool cards from your hand anyway, and then sending them into the Lost Zone to do more damage, it's probably not the worst ability to have in a pinch, but I wouldn't be surprised if people end up trying out Rotom V-Star, they end up using, you know, either an alternative V-Star power in the form of something like Arceus, or maybe, you know, Regulus V Star, not Regulus V Star, but Regidrago V Star is the one I meant, that allows you to look at the top 7 cards of your deck and then or you discard the top 7 cards of your deck, I believe, and then you retrieve 2 cards. So, you know, that could also help with milling out tools. So, yeah, I don't think the card is terrible. It's not bulk by any stretch of the imagination, but 250 HP is pretty dangerous. So next up, we have the Mewtwo. So this is a really interesting one. Has the attack limit break that does 90 damage, and if your opponent has 3 or fewer prize cards remaining, this attack does 90 more. And then the first attack, which I guess is worth mentioning, Side Pump, allows you to accelerate up to 2 psychic energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. So it is interesting that the wording is not just Mewtwo, you can actually use this to accelerate energy to the bench, which is pretty cool. So one thing I'll say about this card is I think immediately it should be good in something like Shadow Rider, that maybe wants to use a 1 prize attacker after one of your Shadow Rider gets knocked out and your opponent takes 3 prize cards. So after that point, you can just try and use Mewtwo's and just do these like massive 2-hit KOs for 3 psychic energy. Doesn't seem too bad. There's also like applications for this card in a format like GLC, which is probably something I should be mentioning now. So GLC, yeah, it seems decent. You know, you have this attacker that can effectively 1-hit KO anything else in GLC and can also accelerate energy to itself. Seems pretty decent. There's also like the option to play this in Gardevoir EX. So you could like accelerate 3 energy from a discard pile to your Mewtwo if one of your Ralts and one of your Gardevoir gets knocked out. So yeah, I think this card's pretty decent overall. No like immediate applications. I guess you could play it in Lost Zone, but I think this card is just better in stuff like Shadow Rider with maybe even the Radiant Eternatus, and then of course stuff like the Gardevoir EX when it comes out. So yeah, pretty decent card overall. Next up we see Katarina V Max line. Katarina V is not really worth going over, but does have the attack horoscope that says look at the top 3 cards of your deck, choose any number of energy cards you find there and attach them to this Pokemon and return the remaining cards to the top of your deck. Just an okay attack to set up with. Then we have Katarina V Max with 320 HP, is pretty decent for a V Max. 2 retreat cost is, yeah, it's alright actually. We do lose Air Balloon post rotation, which is a pain, so hopefully we should see something to help out with retreat cost. But the main attraction here is the ability Witch's Domain. It says once in your turn, you may move up to 2 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to your opponent's active Pokemon. So theoretically, if you have 4 Hatterene in play, you can, let's say, move up to 8 damage counters from your Pokemon to your opponent's active, and that'll hopefully act as well as So this is going to be good for like setting up KOs as well as healing your Pokemon, which is pretty cool. It allows Max Divine Wrath that's only doing 150 to actually do substantially more. And that's also doing Confusion, so I could definitely see some kind of Katarina Quad Max deck where you play, you know, maybe you play the Radiant Eternatus to get a bunch of these out and play immediately, but you also play this with like, I don't know, I guess you could play this with Shadow Rider and the Mewtwo, but I think this would just be better on its own, honestly, with like healing and disruption, crushing hammers, all that kind of shenanigans. Maybe you could play it with Gardevoir EX because you kind of want to move the damage counters that you're accelerating with Gardevoir, because Gardevoir will accelerate your Psychic Energy, but it will put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So yeah, there's definitely some synergy there. Overall, I don't think this card is terrible. It seems pretty decent in, you know, the post-standard format, kind of going into Scarlet Violet. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this one. Zashian V Star, 270 HP, so one of the more decent HPs for V Star. I know we've seen a lot of like 260, 250s lately, but Zashian coming in with 270 is always nice. We do have to bear in mind that for a few short months, we will have the Zashian V from Sword and Shield base set that's really good, so we do have to bear that in mind as a way of accelerating energy, as well as stuff like Metal Saucer. So it does have a lot going for it, but what it does attacks actually do. So Breaking Edge for 2 Metal Colors does 200 damage, and then this damage isn't affected by weakness, resistance, or any effects on your opponent's active. Kind of sucks, to be honest, because it means that you're not like hitting weakness on something like a Kyurem, but I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You could just use Zashian V to one-hit KO them, so it's not the worst, but you are going through any effects, so I guess it means you go through stuff like Miltank, which is kind of cool. But either way, 200 damage is actually a step down from Zashian V, but at least you're going through effects and resistance, if that's ever important. But the main attraction for me for playing this card in Zashian V deck would be the V-Star Power, Star Sword, that for 2 metal and 2 colors does 310, and it also does 30 to itself, but the 310 is really big. It's just allowing you to get a massive one-hit KO on effectively anything in the game if you have some kind of modifier, so giving Zashian V a way of just getting a free one-hit KO once per game seems really strong, honestly. And there's like a bunch of other metal type support in standard right now, so yeah, I think Zashian V Star is actually pretty decent. It doesn't seem like a bad card at all, but we'll have to see how this goes, because Japan kind of like this card, but they also don't seem to like it. It kind of tosses in and out with seeing play, so we'll have to see how this one goes. We also have the Zamazunta V Star, again 270 hit points. You'd think Zamazunta, being like the more defensive, bulkier mon, would have more HP, but oh well. Giga Impact for 2 Metal Colors does 220, and this Pokemon can't attack during next turn. I think this is a direct replica, almost, of the Zashian V's base attack, so if you're playing Zamazenta just for the attack, then it's really not worth it. I do believe, however, that the tool card that says your Zamazenta V will take 70 less damage from attacks or something, the one that says you gain plus 70 HP, I think that does still apply here. That's probably something I should have mentioned for Zashian, is that it has the Zashian Sword to do plus 30 against EX. So that's probably something worth bearing in mind. But the Zamazenta, yeah, you could probably attach the shield and get plus 70 HP. I will need to check a ruling for that, because that might just be for the basic V. But if it just says Zamazenta V, then yeah, you could potentially get plus 70 HP buff on Zamazenta V Star, which is pretty big. But what does the rest of the card actually do? The ability Star Shield is your V-Star power that says, you may use this ability during your turn. During your opponent's next turn, all of your Pokemon take 100 less damage. So, a very situational ability. But we have seen in the past that one-offs Fantimas in the list, stuff like Cheryl, can actually turn the tide in your favor and swing the game back to your side. So, it's not the worst V-Star power ever. And if you're playing some kind of like tanking deck anyway, then maybe this card isn't so bad. So yeah, kind of like that Zamazenta, but this Zamazenta might be just a lot better. So decent ability, Metal Shield says this Pokemon has any energy, it takes 30 less damage from attacks, so pesky Cramorants will never be one-hit killing you. And then Retaliate for 2 Metal Nicolas does 100 damage, and if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your last turn, this attack does 120 more. So it's a very lethal card in something like GLC. You know, you've got the Magnezone with Magnetic Circuit to accelerate energy to it. But it's also really, really good in the Lost Zone deck. So you just hit Mirage Gate and then you start using Retaliate. and as soon as your opponent just knocks out a Cramorant or a Comfey, then of course you can just start swinging 220 every turn for 3 energy, which seems very, very strong on a single prize basic Pokemon. So yeah, definitely a very strong card in the Lost Zone deck. Could be decent in JLC as well, just like the Mewtwo. So yeah, I definitely think this is a card to keep an eye on. So the next one is going to be Radiant Eternatus. There's definitely been a lot of speculation on how good this card actually is. I'm going to say this out loud. I don't think this card will be amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but it will be a very fun card to use no matter what. So first of all, it's a Radiant Pokemon, so it will take up your Radiant slot. 170 HP is really solid, but we're probably not going to be attacking and using Power Beam to do 200. Instead, we're going to be using that ability, Climactic Gate, that says, when you place Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, during your turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 Pokemon VMAX, put them onto your bench, but the turn ends. So this is a great way of just cheating out VMAX into play, obviously, but the whole problem with this card is you have to find it turn 1 for it to be really good. It does end your turn, which means you're not accelerating any energy to those VMAX, so you have to have an alternative way of accelerating energy. So I'm honestly not too sold on this card because you just have to find it on the first turn going second. So I don't know. I think a lot of other people seem to be fairly optimistic. There's definitely some cool deck lists. I'm just like not a huge fan of this card. I can see the potential, but I could also see this card being an absolute flop or something. So yeah, have to let me know what you think down below. But Eternatus isn't really doing it for me just yet. But yeah, seems okay. Then we have probably the most important card in Crown Zenith. All the other ones suck in comparison to this Badoof. Amazing Pokemon, 60 HP is absolutely incredible. The ability Calm Countenance says, as long as this Pokemon is on your bench, prevent all damage done to it. Absolutely broken ability. The attack Hyper Fang for 2 colors, doing 30 damage. I mean, this is just incredible. Absolutely amazing card. Anyway, moving on. Regulus V, 240 HP, has the attack Raging Blow. I should probably say that 240 HP is an awful lot for an Evolving V Star. Evolving V, I should say. So major props to Regulus V for having so much hit points. But then Raging Blow does 100 damage and then 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon, but he's now confused. So not a bad attack, honestly, because for a short while until rotation, we will have Memory Capsule in standard format. So Memory Capsule is a tool that you can attach to one of your Pokemon and then use a previous attack from a previous evolution. So we can actually copy Raging Blow for Regulus V Star, which has the absolute mammoth 300 HP. So we could theoretically copy Raging Blow and, you know, do massive 2-hit kills that way, which is really cool. So we could use something like Raging Blow, and then if our opponent somehow doesn't attack, we just use another Raging Blow, or, you know, we can always use Giga Impact, but ultimately seems decent. But looking at Regulus V Star on its own, what does it actually do? Giga Impact, 3 colors, which is really good, so it just means you can use stuff like Arceus, Double Turbo. If you use Double Turbo, your damage will go down by 20, meaning that this card will be more difficult to take one it kills with, but you can have powerful colors in your deck, so do bear that in mind. So if you use Arceus to accelerate 2 energy to this and then slap a powerful colors, you will be doing 250, and then with a choice belt, you will be doing 280, so this card seems pretty devious as an attacker. This Pokemon can't attack during an next turn, seems like a pretty meh trade-off, honestly, for doing 230 for 3, so, you know, I would much rather do 230 for 3 colors and not attack next turn than do 240 with an Aerodactyl and then mill 3 into the Lost Zone. So I think Regulus V Star is pretty decent as an attacker. And then the ability Star Guardian says, you can use this ability during your turn only if your opponent has exactly 1 prize card remaining. Discard one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and all cards attached to it. A super unique attack, very reminiscent of GG End, I believe it was, on the Giratina tag team. So very cool ability. It's kind of niche as a V-Star power, so I could see this maybe being decent in like a Arceus V-Star deck. So maybe use Arceus to charge up energies. You have the option to use Star Breath or Star Guardian, so you have that choice. But mainly using Arceus to accelerate energy to make use of Giga Impact. So I'm one of the more optimistic people about Regulus. I think it could be good in a way. I think there's definitely like solid potential here as an attacker. Not Knuckle Impact, Giga Impact, doing 230 just seems pretty decent. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this card, but I can also see why people are a bit skeptical about it. Then we have Skyseal Stone that has the V Star power, so this will give one of your evolving Vs, I should say, or one of your V Pokemon an alternative V Star power to use. Star Order says you may use this ability during your turn. During this turn, when the damage from this attack, it's a lot of words. Right, when this Pokemon V just knocks out one of your opponent's V Star or V Max, you take one additional prize card. This seems like really, really good in evolving V decks and stuff. Like, we just looked at like Regigigas V and V Star. Think about Raging Blow. If you knock out a V Star Pokemon with that attack, then essentially you get to take 4 prize cards. So you could attach this to something like a Drapion, for example, and then just want to kill a Mew V Max for 4 prize cards or something. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. The most obvious application that really stands out to me is something like Suicune Ludicolo, which doesn't really have its own V-Star power except maybe the Forest Grove tablet. So maybe you attach this to a Suicune, then you evolve Ludicolo, you get this like massive 1-hit KO or 2-hit KO on a V or V-Star Pokemon, and then you just get to take an extra prize card. Or, you know, maybe you attach this to your Raikou V, you know, your opponent's Lugia deck doesn't get a Dunsparce down, and you just take 3 prize cards and get in the lead. So I think this card is pretty decent. I know there's like not a lot of people talking about this card online, which seems a little strange to me because 1 extra prize card has always been a good effect in the TCG no matter what. So I think this card is pretty good. Yeah, seems pretty decent. And then I believe that is, yeah, that's the end of the main reveals. But we do have some side reveals to go over that weren't translated directly. We do have this Kyogre coming out in this set that allows it to accelerate water energy to itself. And then its main attack, you have to discard 3 energy from this Pokemon, but it does 180 damage in sniping. So okay, as an okay attacker in a Frostmoth or a Palkia deck, but mainly the big appeal here is of course GLC, because big boy Kyogre that did spread damage was unfortunately banned from GLC. So we're kind of on the lookout for a new Kyogre to take that place. And this Kyogre honestly fits the bill really nicely. Being able to do this massive blow-up move that just snipes anything, like this could just snipe a stage 2 draw engine on the bench or something, so I'm a big fan of this Kyogre and I think it should be really good in GLC. So this next one is an attacker that I've not really seen many people talk about. I do think this card's like okay in GLC, but I think it's better in stuff like Lost Zone decks. So 2 fire and colors, Volcanion does 80 damage, and if it has any water energy, it does 160. So decent to a KO number, and of course if you have stuff like Mirage Gate, you can accelerate 2 different types of energy. Maybe it's just me, maybe I'm thinking Volcanion is a lot better than I think it is, and maybe I'm just a major fan of Volcanion, which is also true. I love the aesthetic of him, but yeah, 80 plus 80 doesn't seem too bad. There's also Luxray out here that has 160 HP. It is a stage 2 Pokemon that only does 50 damage for single energy. But what's really cool about Luxray is the ability that says when you start the game, you may put this in your active as a face down basic Pokemon. So very cool ability, so you can actually play 4 Luxray in your deck and not bother with Shinx or Luxio. Very reminiscent of the Talonflame, which was one of the first decks that I ever played back in the day with Steam Siege. So very cool ability to see a return. And then of course the main attack for 1 colors does 50, and you get to search your deck for any 2 trainers. And it does have free retreat on top of that, and it does 1-hit KO a Sobble. So I'm a big fan of this card, honestly. I think it's a good upgrade to budget decks, and I think post-rotation, when we need to have more consistent ways of finding our rare candies and our Pokemon search and stuff like that, I think this could be really good, honestly, in those stage 2 decks. So yeah, it doesn't seem like a bad card at all. Also, you're a lightning type, and there's loads of lightning support in the next set. So yeah, big fan of Luxray. Then just to round things off as a final card to go over, we do have this Lycanroc. I know a lot of people will say this card is absolute trash, and maybe it is, but honestly, I kind of like this Lycanroc. For single fighting in a colorless, it does 240, and then it does 80 less for each energy attached to your opponent's active. Seems kind of terrible, but if your opponent just has a V in play that doesn't have any energy, or you know, you play Crushing Hammers or other ways of denying energy, 240 is very respectable damage. I mean, look at Aerodactyl V Star, does 240 for 3. This does 240 for 2 if your opponent has no energy. So yeah, I think this card is like okay in a budget meme kind of sense. It's definitely not great. It's kind of like in there with likes of Volcanion, maybe even Kyogre, but yeah, I do think there's been some cool reveals. Let me know what you think down below. This has been Emmer Power, and